From a pair of provincial government policy reversals to Pierre Poilievre's road forward as an Alberta MP. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Calgary-based public opinion consultant Janet Brown and Laurie Williams, political scientist at Mount Royal University. Good evening to you both, and let's begin with the Smith government backtracking on expense disclosure policy changes that have generated considerable blowback.
You'll want to know if your tax dollars are paying to rent a Corolla or a Corvette. You'll want to know if your tax dollars are paying for Subway sandwich supper or lobster and steak on your dime. So this is why detailed receipts matter.
Rules posted earlier this month removed a requirement for the Premier, her ministers, senior staff, and deputy ministers to publicly post receipts for expenses over $100. It also erased 8 years of previously available online records. The province called the change a safety measure to protect ministers who often stay at the same hotels. Now, this week, Cabinet asked the finance minister to directly request the Treasury Board immediately reverse the policy. Janet, now, had the initial changes remained in place, how significant a policy shift would that have been?
Well, if it wasn't for the reversal of this decision that was announced on August 1st, then I think we probably would have gone on for a few weeks and a few months of people of MLAs finding it a lot easier to do their expenses, finding it a lot easier to accept big gifts and that sort of thing. But I can't imagine it would have gone on for long. I can't imagine that government couldn't have anticipated the blowback that they got. So I just think making this change on August 1st, it was designed at a time that they were hoping to slip it through. But I think that was a really bad calculation on government's part, because maybe they could have gone along with these new regulations for a month or two to make life easier for the MLAs and how they report things and what gifts they accept and what expenses they accept. But I just can't imagine it going on for very long because it is such a significant change. I think the blowback was inevitable.
So, Laurie, when pressed about the initial change at an Alberta Next town hall in Edmonton last week, the Premier said she was confused by the policy, that the original intent was around safety concerns, hiding the names of hotels, but it turned out to be something quite different. How likely is such a significant policy shift that it would happen without Danielle Smith being fully aware of the scope?
Yeah, that's not particularly credible. It's problematic because it raises questions of integrity. It could raise questions of competence if indeed she didn't know. And the big one is that it's so off-brand. This is a leader and a government that's been devoted to transparency and accountability. Grassroots democracy has been a byword within their caucus for as long as Danielle Smith has been in government. This is something she's been focused on. And so, again, it really raises questions about this government and how they couldn't have anticipated this, why they're trying to fix it now, and what other evasions might sort of be in the works. The other thing that's problematic about this is that we've got something that was available in terms of transparency and accountability that they tried to remove. It's moving in the wrong direction. It doesn't matter what other provinces are doing. What matters is whether it's wisely stewarding taxpayer dollars when people are really struggling with affordability.
Janet, are changes of any sort still warranted where expense disclosures are concerned, or is this likely now a dead issue, one the government wants to quickly forget?
Well, if the reason behind these changes were to sort of protect information about the hotels that different MLAs are staying at, like, I do understand the safety concern thing. I think there were much easier ways to deal with it other than just sort of the blunt instrument of changing the whole policy and dumping all of the records. So, you could cross out the name of the hotel or hotels or something where you don't have to disclose the name. So maybe there was a grain of truth to the idea that this was about the security of the MLAs, but it's kind of amazing that they didn't anticipate the unintended consequences of trying to address a very specific problem in such a broad way. So if there are specific concerns that are legitimate, then just deal with those specific concerns. But this was just far too blunt a change for something of specific concern.
Now, on another front, the Smith government now rolling back its policy that would have seen healthcare workers being charged for COVID-19 shots starting this fall. And unions are calling it a major win.
They didn't just make this course correction out of the kindness of their heart. They did it because workers and unions pushed back and demanded better.
The change comes 2 months after the Smith government announced health workers would be among the many Albertans who would be charged to get COVID vaccinations starting this fall, claiming the new policy was to prevent wasting vaccines after revealing $135 million was spent on unused doses. Health union leadership say they worked together, from lobbying MLAs to pressing their concerns at the bargaining table. Lori, what is to be made of this policy reversal? Is this as simple as the Smith government listening and responding to frontline health professionals?
I think it does raise questions. I mean, they've made two fairly major missteps in rapid succession. They seem to be changing their mind rather quickly, sort of trying to blunt criticism, presumably. And it makes me wonder if there are bigger concerns, if they're worried about where they are standing in terms of support amongst voters. But they're still going to have questions around this, because although they said they want to get rid of red tape, it looks like it's going to be much more difficult for people to get these vaccines. So the booking system for getting a COVID vaccine or a flu vaccine, things that are important to public health, things that could save health dollars down the road, those, we don't even know what the system is at this point in time. The questions about whether we can even get the vaccines at pharmacies, whether we have to go to some sort of central location, none of that is known at a time when people are starting to try to make their plans for the fall. Again, it's a healthcare concern, but it's also an organizational concern about what's going on within the healthcare system, and are we getting clear, well-planned policies put in place.
Janet, how much of a precedent might this reversal set, given a majority of Albertans will still have to pay out of pocket for those shots, for those wanting those shots? Could this policy be reversed further to expand the scope?
Well, I was just going to say, maybe we need to look out for further revisions to this. Like Lori said about expenses, it was off-brand of the Conservatives to introduce less transparency. In a way, it's also off-brand for them to introduce, as Lori said, more red tape into vaccinations. Now they want to be careful with their base. They want to be careful that their base doesn't perceive that vaccines are being forced upon them. But it is off-brand to make vaccines more difficult for people who choose them to get them, and in particular healthcare workers. And Mike Parker from the Alberta HSAA, Alberta Health Sciences Association, he compared vaccinations to just any safety mechanism that somebody needs to do their job: rubber gloves, face masks, that sort of thing. If a vaccination is going to keep a healthcare worker safer at their place of work, if they believe it's going to keep them safer, then to put up this red tape barrier seems quite absurd. Now we're going to have to talk about teachers. And, do teachers need that vaccine to feel safe in the classroom? And is it now an expense we're putting on teachers? You put an expense, you make people, sign up, get a slot, they can't go to their pharmacy. All of these things are barriers that's going to make the vaccine rate uptake lower. And that does not seem to be, this red tape doesn't seem to be on brand for the UCP.
It'll be interesting to see if that comes up in contract negotiations as well with the teachers. Okay, for us, time for a bit of a break, but when we come back, Pierre Poilievre's road forward as a rural Alberta Member of Parliament. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from Bonnie Critleys off the top this evening, the independent candidate who finished second to Pierre Poilievre in this week's Battle River Crowfoot by-election. Janet, we'll get to the Conservative leader's road forward in just a moment, but what is to be made of an independent candidate coming ahead of those representing federal parties? How much of a win is this for Bonnie Critleys to garner 10% of the vote?
Well, Pierre Poilievre won by a very, very large margin, so you can't take that away from him. But it was interesting to see an independent candidate ahead of the Liberals, the NDP, other major parties. And as Bonnie Critchley said, there were many independents on the ballot. So it's a double victory for her that people had to remember which independent they wanted to vote for. Bonnie Critchley wanted the ballot question for this by-election to be, should we be represented by somebody local or somebody outside of the riding? Well, clearly that wasn't the ballot question. The ballot question was, do we want Pierre Poilievre back in the House leading the Conservatives? And 80% of people, more or less, in that riding who voted said, yes, let's get Poilievre back in the House so he can be an effective leader for the opposition. But she had the second strongest message, and that was about local representation. And that makes this by-election very memorable.
Laurie, to what degree do you feel Bonnie Critchley, to a degree, reshape the narrative around this by-election? What was her impact at the end of the day?
Well, I think she spoke very eloquently, let me say effectively, for the people of the riding, the concerns that they have. And aside from saying she thought somebody within the constituency should be representing the constituency, someone who knew them, understood their concerns, she actually got Pierre Poilievre speaking a little bit more about what some of those concerns were, addressing some of the issues that she raised. But she also held his record up for scrutiny. She basically said that she, as a military veteran, has cared more about and done more about the issues that matter to people in that constituency than Pierre Poilievre has. And I think it could have resonance outside of the riding. But I think it was a very effective campaign. And just looking at the coverage she got nationally, on regular media and social media, she was extraordinarily effective at getting her message out.
Yep, she did draw headlines, that is for sure. Now, Janet, to Pierre Poilievre, after so many years of being an Ottawa area MP, how different will the dynamics, the expectations be in representing a rural Alberta riding?
Well, I think this is the very point that Bonnie Critchley wanted to make, is how much attention is he going to spend on this riding? And when a riding is represented by a party leader, it's a completely different dynamic. You don't expect to see your party leader around very much because they've got other duties. And so I think the people in this riding are not going to be surprised if Pierre Poilievre doesn't show up very often. All he's got to do is show up one or two times and he's exceeded expectations. But, I think at the end of the day, voters, they voted overwhelmingly for the Conservatives in the general election. And in this by-election, they said, look, we have not changed our minds. We want to be represented by a Conservative. We want Pierre Poilievre to be leader of the opposition. That's what they're going to get. They're going to get a leader of the opposition who's going to have many concerns. They're not going to have an MLA who has this local riding as their only concern. That's what they voted for.
Laurie, what's to be made of the Conservative leader touting this by-election victory as a sign of political resilience? Would a similar outcome have been expected had he run in an urban riding?
Well, he picked this riding because it was the second safest seat in the country. That's absolutely what he wanted to make sure that there was no chance that he would not win. And he knew that he needed to win by a large margin. And the voter turnout even was quite high. It was around 58%, which is very high for a by-election, even pretty good for a general. So he very much wanted to make sure that he sailed over this very sort of basic first hurdle, because the real challenges for him are going to be basically changing enough of what it is that he's addressing and how he's addressing it, that he appeals to a broader range of Canadians. He's got to go beyond criticism to proposing credible policies that he would be better at achieving than the Prime Minister is. Right now in the polls, he's well behind Mark Carney as preferred Prime Minister. The party is still doing reasonably well. He's still got challenges, and although there aren't any sort of contenders in the wings, if those poll numbers don't start to improve, then I think more questions will be raised.
Janet, to pick up on some of Laurie's points there, in returning to Parliament, how much of an impact will Pierre Poilievre now need to make on public opinion, given those post-election polls continue to put the Liberals out front of the Conservatives, Mark Carney ahead of Pierre Poilievre?
Well, Pierre Poilievre got a vote that was very similar to the other candidate during the general election. So, as I said, most people in that riding said, this is the guy we want. And it was the second easiest riding. Now, as a Conservative leader, though, that you have to sort of have the discipline to ask yourself, are the things that are making me this popular in this riding? Are these the things that are potentially making me unpopular in other ridings? So Pierre Poilievre has got his seat. Now he has to focus in on how do I become successful again in suburban Ottawa ridings? How do we become successful again in suburban Ontario ridings? It's great that you can win by such a large margin in a rural riding in Alberta. But to win an election, you've got to find a way to be appealing in places with higher populations where there's more seats.
All right. We'll have to leave it there for time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thank you, Michael.